Hello. We have with us today Ambassador of Ireland to India, Brian McElduff, speaking to South Asia Monitor and India Review and Analysis. Ambassador, you have been here in India for over 3 years now?
Yeah, about 3.5 years. I came at the end of 2015.
So how has your experience been here?
Very rewarding. My previous career had been in Europe. In fact, I'm going back to Europe now. I'm going to Moscow in 2 months' time. So India has been the first Asian job I've done as ambassador or as a diplomat in any capacity. So I always felt that India would be the most interesting posting in Asia, and I think it's been the case. So it's been very rewarding, a very interesting time to be here, to witness the transformations which are taking place in India, because Ireland and India have a very old relationship, but Ireland has really developed since it first got to know India economically and as a society. And to see the transformation which is now going on here, I think gives us lots of opportunities. So I've been trying to explore some of those opportunities.
Okay, as you say, ties go back to actually this India-Ireland ties go back to the 19th century when this many Irish men joined the British civil services, the colonial services, and today there are around 34,000 Indians in Ireland, of which 20,500 are people of Indian origin, while the rest are NRIs. So how have these connections impacted on the present bilateral ties?
It's almost bewildering, the number of connections here. My job is to kind of knit all the connections together in some sort of strategic way. I mean, the Irish have been coming to India for a long time, even before the 19th century, I'm sure, as adventurers, because we were part of the British Empire. We weren't part of Britain. We were governed by the British in many ways as a colony. We had a viceroy, like India and Ireland had viceroys. Opportunities were quite limited for most ordinary people in Ireland, which is why they were very mobile. They tended to leave Ireland if they were ambitious. Many of them went to North America, especially the United States. We have a huge community in the United States, but many of the ones with a sense of adventure came to India. I'm very happy though about the image of Ireland, because our main legacy issue, you identified it, was setting up the schools. Many of the top schools in India were founded by the Irish, mostly the religious orders, but for boys and girls, so the Christian Brothers schools, also the Loreto convents and the Presentation convents, and there's a very big network, dozens of them. There are not so many of the Irish teachers, the nuns and the brothers left. Mostly they're quite elderly, but it's been a very deep connection, which I always like to visit the schools when I travel around India, and I think it's one of the reasons why we have this high level of familiarity. So New Delhi was Ireland's first embassy in Asia. Before Tokyo or Beijing or anywhere else, we opened here because of the closeness of the independence generations. So particularly our then leader De Valera was quite a good friend of Nehru, who was then Prime Minister, and so basically Nehru invited us to come and open the embassy, because we had such an excellent informal network through the schools, but through politicians simply knowing each other. We'd already left the Commonwealth to become a republic at that stage, but there was still a lot of contact. So I think even though we've been here since the early 1960s, for quite a long time not that much was happening, because Ireland became focused on European integration. India went a slightly different way politically, and I think now, especially because Ireland is doing very well economically, you said, we've quite a lot of of Indian citizens and Indian origin people working and living in Ireland very successfully. The profile of the Indian community in Ireland is mostly of highly educated, well-paid, professional people, maybe more like your community in the United States, where Indian Americans are the most successful immigrant group. Really remarkable. So they have that kind of similar profile. We have, I think now, nearly 4,000 Indian students coming to Ireland, mostly postgraduate, and they're not just studying there, but they're getting jobs. They're graduating. We allow people to stay back for up to 2 years. And Dublin, Ireland is a very happening place. It has a lot of energy. We have a younger population than most of Europe. There's a lot of business going on, a big high-tech sector. So, and it depends quite a lot on educated people from India. So, we're gaining a lot from the Indian community in Ireland, and it gives us also a new set of links between the two countries.
Ireland's Prime Minister Leo Varadkar is a person of Indian origin.
He is, his father.
Can you tell us what is his outlook towards ties with India vis-a-vis the imminent Brexit? What opportunities does Ireland offer to India post-Brexit?
Okay, it's a very big question. Yes, our Prime Minister, who we call the Taoiseach, his father is Indian, and he's very proud of this fact. We're hoping to arrange a visit for him to India. Prime Minister Modi invited him. Prime Minister Modi came to Dublin in September 2015. Very good visit, very business-like. So the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar does wish to come back. There's a very good additional reason for him to come. We have just opened a consulate general in Mumbai with 2 Irish diplomats. It's a temporary office. Next year we will move into a big office called Ireland House, and it will be the consulate and our trade and investment people together under one roof in Mumbai in the BKC. So I think this will be an excellent opportunity for Leo Varadkar, the Taoiseach, to visit India. But even though I'll be gone at that stage, I can see that visit being quite a historic one, to just reaffirm all of these links and to talk about our old links, but also our new links as to global economies going forward. The trade situation isn't bad, but it could be a lot better. It's dominated by services, because those are our strengths. I mentioned education. Aviation is a real strength of Ireland too. It's something we've really focused on. So a lot of aircraft are leased from Irish companies. But there's been a huge amount of investment in aviation in India. I see our airports are world class, there have been difficulties in the aviation sector too, but this is an area where we could definitely cooperate a great deal. That and education, and more broadly skills and training, because people need to get jobs. There are other areas. We've transformed our agriculture sector. Even though we're now a high-tech economy, agriculture is still an important component of our economy. And I sometimes say, when I was a child we had farming, now we have agribusiness, because it's a business, and it requires investment. Agriculture in Ireland has been transformed partly because of the EU and its common agricultural policy, but it's certainly become a very efficient operation. Our food and drink exports are important. They're world class. We focus very much on quality and marketing. A couple of our exports may not be designed so much for India. We export a lot of beef, but we also export a lot of dairy products and alcohol. I noticed that Indians have a taste for whiskey, particularly, and we produce some superb whiskey. So I do a lot of events. I'm doing one this evening in Kolkata, in fact, whiskey tasting, to introduce people to the different types of Irish whiskey, because they're used to Scotch. which is also an excellent product, but we think there's room for Irish whiskey, which is a slightly different product. So, I think the potential is enormous. We need to invest more resources, but we're doing that with the opening of our embassy in Mumbai, our consulate in Mumbai, and with the very high caliber of Indians living in Ireland. So Brexit, you mentioned Brexit.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll have to see. We'll have to see. I think everybody's now an expert on Brexit, but I think we have to deal with the reality. Unless there's a second referendum, which results in a Remain vote, Britain will leave. The process has been extended until the end of October. Now there will be a new Prime Minister, and we have to see who that is. But no matter who it is, reality doesn't change. We've negotiated, and when I say we, I mean the EU. Ireland negotiates as part of the EU. It's not a bilateral negotiation. We have negotiated a withdrawal agreement. There's also a very good, positive political declaration about the future relationship. We think it's a good basis. The EU has negotiated, to defend its own interests, including its legal rules. So,
Ambassador, can you just do you think that the impasse over the backstop issue will be resolved? And generally, for Indian and South Asian viewers, can you just explain what this backstop is all about?
Yeah, I mean, I won't go deeply into history. I mean, Ireland, even though it's small, is divided in two for historical reasons. The northeast of the island it changed its population in the 17th century because a lot of British settlers came at that time, and they wished to stay under British rule in the early 20th century. So the island was divided. We've been divided since the early 1920s. That led to civil conflict from the late 1960s through the 1970s, 1980s. For a whole generation there was civil conflict, and the two governments resolved to end that conflict. And they did so in the 90s with the support of others, including the United States and the EU. Was a huge amount of goodwill, and we signed an international agreement, the Good Friday Agreement, which ended the conflict. It meant a lot of compromise, but that's diplomacy, and it was a great diplomatic triumph. So we're trying to preserve the provisions of that agreement. One of the outcomes of the agreement was that the border between Northern Ireland and the Irish state would be open. And we all agree with that. The British government agree it must stay open. But if Britain were to leave the EU customs union, there would have to be customs controls. And that would mean infrastructure. So when this issue was not really debated during the Brexit debate before they voted. It was perhaps a little bit neglected. But since the Brexit process is underway, it's obviously become a difficult issue. So it was agreed that no matter what the outcome of the negotiations were, that the border would stay open, and that is negotiable. So that's the backstop. And it could be that there is a new trading relationship between Britain and the EU, which makes the backstop unnecessary, and that would be very welcome. So there's some customs arrangement which means that goods can flow freely. But until we have something of that sort in a legal text, we have to have the backstop, which states that both sides will ensure that the border stays open. And that is part of the withdrawal agreement, which is, the negotiations ended. So Britain, we hope that the withdrawal agreement will be passed. The other options are that there's a further extension, but we don't think that the EU wants to grant another extension to the Article 50 process. It's often called the Irish backstop, but in a way it's an EU backstop. Like the EU has fully supported this it's seen in a very negative way by certain elements in maybe the House of Commons or the British media, which we find a little bit baffling, because in many ways it's a good thing that Britain, under the backstop, Britain would stay in the common customs area, which makes a tremendous amount of sense given the amount of trade they do with the EU. So I think the British have maybe been a little bit too negative about the backstop, but in any case it's not a negotiable issue. We are not going to have any bilateral negotiations with Britain, so we negotiate as part of the EU, and that's all. I do think, though, in some circumstances, there's always some silver lining. In a sense, if Britain does leave, Ireland will be the only sizable EU member state speaking English with the similar legal system, common law based system to India. Certainly some investments in UK, in London especially, are moving out of the UK to EU countries to retain their access to the single market, and some of those companies are coming to Ireland. It's just simply business. So Ireland will stay in the single market, and so, you know, we it is an opportunity. It's not one we wanted, because ideally we'd like the British to stay in the EU, where they've been excellent partners and really we've worked together very well. But if they're going to leave, then some business is probably going to come our way as a consequence. So yeah.
Okay, one last question. On the other side, there was this legendary friendship between Irish poet W.B. Yeats and Rabindranath Tagore, but today's generation hardly knows about it. So, any plans of celebrating that, literary friendship in order to connect culturally?
I'm a great believer in cultural diplomacy. In fact, the Yeats-Tagore relationship is interesting. They were close friends. I mean, I think they became slightly less close because Tagore won the Nobel Prize before Yeats. But perhaps that was an issue to some extent in the fact that the relationship cooled slightly. But definitely, they were two great poets, and huge figures. We have a bust of Tagore in our park called St. Stephen's Green. In fact, it's just outside the Foreign Ministry in Dublin. Very prominent bust of Tagore, and we are donating a bust of W.B. Yeats to India. The bust is at the moment in my dining room, but we're going to give it to an Indian institution in the near future. We thought maybe when our Prime Minister comes, the Taoiseach, that could be symbolic, that could be the cultural part of the programme. There's a lot of interest, both in literature, you mentioned, I think also in music and film. I tried to bring some Irish bands here. Indian audiences have really appreciated some of the bands. We have very strong folk music tradition. So Indians do quite like that interactive culture, that they can sing along or dance. Our Irish culture is quite different to continental European culture to some extent. I mean, folk culture is everywhere, but that sort of concert hall tradition of sitting for 5 hours listening to an opera is not part of our culture. Our culture is based on folk tradition. So it has a very big audience here. Literature is something we've done. We've always participated in the various festivals here, including the Jaipur Literature Festival, which is now having an event in Northern Ireland, in Belfast. So it's a very positive thing to do. Cultural diplomacy, certainly, and we have quite decent resources. We are also very grateful that your own cultural relations people have brought some guests from Ireland, because I think there's lots of things we have to talk about preservation of culture. We have a very good collection, which is not that well known in Dublin, called the Chester Beatty Library. It was founded by an American mining millionaire, but it has a great focus on Mughal period art. So one of the best collections of Indian art is actually in Dublin. But he paid for it. He didn't. We didn't. Nothing was taken from India. He was a wealthy collector, and that's a cultural resource. But no, I cooperate. We cooperate quite a lot with Indian universities, especially JNU here, where especially the history department and also the English department. We have excellent cooperation there. But I think you're right to identify culture, and especially those great poets, Yeats and Tagore, give us a really, really important link.
Thank you, Ambassador, for sparing your
pleasure. No, thank you.